ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਖਾਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਆਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਖਾਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਸਾਡੀ ਮੇ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਪੋਲੀਟਿਕਸ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੇਨਸਟ੍ਰੀਮ ਪੋਲਿਟਿਕਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੇ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨਸ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਰੋਲ ਮੌਜੂਦਾ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਿਛਲੀਆਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਲੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ। ਗਿਣਤੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਘੱਟ ਹੈ ਪਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀ ਦੇਣ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀਜ਼ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ। ਵੀ ਆਰ ਵੈਰੀ ਆਨਰਡ ਐਂਡ ਪ੍ਰਿਵਿਲੇਜ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੀਮਾ ਮਲਹੋਤਰਾ ਜੀ ਅੱਜ ਇਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਾਜ਼ਰੀਆਂ ਪਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਸੀਮਾ ਜੀ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਜੀ ਆਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੀ। ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
We want to start the show, just a brief background history of Seema ji. Where you were born, family, thodi ji background. If you can just share that with our viewers.
Well, it's an honour to be able to share our stories with you, because when we were talking earlier, we were just saying how as politicians we don't often get the time to remember sometimes. We're so busy in what happens. I grew up here, very close to here in Hounslow.
Okay.
And was born in Hammersmith. Went to school in Isleworth, just very close to Nishkam School. And so to represent an area where you grew up also is very special as a politician. We grew up above our shop in Osterley. And so when we grew up, we had my dadiji with us as well, and 5 children and mum and dad, and that's how we lived, a very simple life, learning about
Indian life.
True Indian life. I think everybody will understand that, and really that dictates, I think, when you learn so much from your parents about how they have chosen to live, what values they live by, how you grow up in the atmosphere of those values of respecting and understanding family, and that being the most important thing. And also I think what was very important for me in that time was when we grew up in the shop, there weren't many Indians here in Hounslow at that time, and so when you're in the community like that, very public role as so many people who have local shops will have, you interact with everybody. You learn how to integrate, you learn how to be with different people from different backgrounds, and others also learning about you. And so I think that was also very important for our family. And certainly for my parents, that the children would learn about the world around them too, and be part of their life also. So in that we learnt a lot from just being part of a public role too, a sense of public service in the way my parents ran their shop as well. We went to the local schools here as well. So I went to school in Heston, and then went to the Green School here in Isleworth, and that also makes a difference when you grow up and you become a politician, to go back to my old schools and to be able to say to young people there today that I was like you, I was here at your school just as you are. And I think that helps make them also make a connection between their lives and what can be their future also.
Seema, you talking about that was the bringing up, growing up, politics, your main theme you came into. When did you think about politics? What made you come into politics? Because with due respect, in Asians, we don't get many Asian ladies or girls of ours coming into mainstream politics. We have men who love our politics and Indian politics, not the UK politics. But how did you manage to choose this as a career, and what made you choose this career?
It's one of those questions in life, isn't it? Whether you choose or somehow life happens. And I think one reflection I have is that I believe very much in having a responsibility to make the world a better place while we are here, to actually make a contribution, to not be about just taking, but to also be about giving, and to leave something better than when you were, in a sense, living. And so in that, I don't think that politics was something I automatically thought about. I really thought about community, and I thought about the roles also of men and women. I think within our Asian culture as well, we've seen, though it's much less so today, but still very problematic, discrimination that exists between men and women, and the need for making sure that we have equality. And that is there at home and in the workplace and in society. And I was very aware of where there was inequality, which you see as a child, you think, why are people treated differently, whether that's because of their race, or, if we experienced racism, or whether it's because of their gender. So I did used to ask questions about why the world was in that way. And I think that is probably what led me eventually to the Labour Party, because I believe that the values of the Labour Party have been very much in line with my own values of a sense of responsibility to others as well as to yourself, and also a sense of everybody being equal, whoever they are, wherever they're from, and tackling any barriers to people coming forward in their own lives. Those are guiding principles. And no political party is perfect, but it's a bit, to me, it's like family in one way. I'm not going to leave the Labour Party, and I am aligned much more with its centre of gravity in terms of its values. So it was very gradual for me. It was gradual in thinking about how we make decisions as a society as well. And in that, I don't know how I did it, but when I was in my primary school in Heston, I actually stood in the school elections when I was 10 years old. And I think that was a starting point. It wasn't anything I ever imagined being the case. And at that time, I remember campaigning for better pensions for the elderly, and that's the experience of having your grandmother living with you, I think. But then I went on to be involved in the community a lot. I spent many summers from when I was, I think, 13 years old, spending time working and supporting children who had mental or physical disabilities. I worked as a home help for the elderly, often those actually within our Asian community, maybe who didn't have children living with them. And so for me, when I wasn't working, but I had time, I used to give it in time in the community. Very much also involved in environmental improvements, campaigning for improved parks. So I think on those matters, I built a strong sense of making a contribution, and step by step, it eventually led me to the Labour Party through the people I was working with. It was then that I think I realised that in a society we make decisions by having a democracy, and a democracy is something you have to protect. It's something that is there by design. Not every society has it. And I believe very strongly as well that I could be in all the pressure groups that I was, Amnesty International, Anti-Apartheid, Friends of the Earth, but you were lobbying somebody else to make a decision. In the end, you also have to be, and have the courage to be part of that decision-making body.
Be part of it.
And being a part of it, the first step in that is a vote. But then it also becomes your roles in public life, whether that's being a school governor or it's being on the board of the hospital. You're making decisions about resources. But then also you can think about a step into elected politics, where you take yourself. I think you have to be quite courageous, but when you get over those hurdles, you can accept some of the compromises, or not compromises, sacrifices that you have to make. But it's part of your role, because going forward, unless we go forward, we're not playing our part to make the world better and respond to the needs of others. And what I also very fundamentally believe is that if we're in Britain, we have a part to play in British life. And I was born here, I've grown up here, I very much cherish and means a lot to me the Indian heritage. It's what we are, it's who we are. But we have learned to be part of Britain too, and we combine East and West in the lives that we lead now. But unless we have people from all backgrounds playing a part in our politics, we're not having decisions made in the interest of everybody in Britain. And that's why representation and coming forward in public life, despite those challenges, is very, very important.
Seema, what was the first step when you came to mainstream politics, as a councillor, or what was the first stepping stone into the drive? Because it's very interesting when we're talking as May elections are approaching. Here on the show is not about your party, it's about any party as politicians. Which was the first stepping stone for you, that you went into a council election, or?
My first stepping stone for an election was certainly the local council elections.
Okay.
I didn't stand in a winnable seat the first time, but actually it made a big difference in learning how to be a candidate and in learning what elected life was potentially going to be like. When you go out as a candidate, you don't go out just as yourself, you go out as part of a team. So for me, that's the Labour Party. You go out and people then see you as a representative of your party. And you learn a lot through that experience of being a candidate. You learn a lot about how you listen to what's going on in the community, how you respond, how you make the case for what needs to change. You learn a lot about how people see you as a candidate, because they will see you not as Seema Malhotra first, they will see you as the Labour candidate. And so some of that sense of identity and how you really progress into public roles is something you don't learn straight away, you learn step by step. And I believe very much in people building their experience through those stepping stones, because then you're able to withstand many more of the challenges. When you're in a position as I am now, as a shadow minister in the Home Office team as well, you have to be able to be a representative not just of your local area, you have to be a representative on national television or in other constituencies where you go to visit of the Labour Party. You have to be a support and a mentor to other people, and the experiences that you gain step by step over a long period of time are the things that are then resources for you and for you to share with others when you come on later. My first actual election that I won was my role now as a Member of Parliament.
Straight as a Member of Parliament? It
was the first formally elected role. So I'd stood also for the London Assembly, which had again taught me a lot, the diversity of seats as well, 5 constituencies. You stand across. And so you learn again so much more about how different areas have different needs, different expectations, people's views about local policy, people's views about national policy. You build your experience in the media, whether that's the radio or television or national print media here, because you have to be playing in that sphere and you have to be confident about being an equal in that sphere. And that doesn't come overnight again. And what I would strongly encourage those who may be thinking about coming forward in politics is to find opportunities, whether it is on our local television channels or radio, or opportunities to go and be in the audience on national television. Those are the places you learn. Just as in any other skill, whether it's teaching or it's engineering or it's being a car mechanic, car mechanics will learn by washing the car. They'll learn by understanding all the parts. Politics isn't that different from that. You have to see it as a whole world in which building your understanding step by step builds those foundations for your success later.
So yes, in our society, as we call the Asian culture, parents are very protective of kids and girls especially, as which career they choose, because long term, when you're married, you become mothers and everything. Was that daunting for you to think that I'm going into politics? Did the parents allow you to do that? Or was there obstacles which said no, because as a common person, you see the politicians, whether he's good or bad, is always under the scrutiny and always very harsh from certain sections of the press or media. Whichever the papers are aligned to, as we all know that some papers support certain parties. Was that the experience you had from your end as well as before you ventured onto the political arena as a career?
Well, I think I'm very lucky in that my parents very much believed that we should try and follow what our dreams were. I think they understood that you can't force children to go down one route, because in the end that will cause resentment and they will be unhappy. I think I'm also very lucky that my older sister was an engineer. My second sister was a doctor. My third sister studied mathematics, now works in public health, and I think by the time they got to the fourth daughter and then my brother, they probably didn't worry as much. So in one way, I think they had built their confidence as well. That as having made choices for ourselves as we were growing up and being successful at school and working very hard, that I think they developed trust that we would make the right decisions for us. But I never did things that went against them in that way and took them with me.
Sure.
Of course, there were challenges. I think particularly while I was still at school and doing those new things that they didn't have the experience in. They were learning about Britain through their children's lives.
Definitely.
And this was one thing they really shared with me later on. And my mother, I remember telling me that, you know, some of that concern, you know, particularly when I really enjoyed going to different churches and, you know, we used to obviously go Gurdwara and temples, but I was very inquisitive about how other people lived, what they believed, how they related to life.
Sure.
And some of that exploration they didn't always understand. But I think as they saw me moving out in society, as my sisters were at university, as those new experiences were really forming part of how our family was understanding these things together, they moved too in their beliefs and in their understanding. Politics was very step by step. I had also a career outside. I was management consultant working with Accenture, PricewaterhouseCoopers, travelling around the country, sometimes internationally. That too was new for them. So to experience that, I think sometimes you have to just let your children go, to then watch the success be built step by step and to be part of that. I think it reduced their fear. And whether they ever expected me to become a politician, I don't know, because I didn't expect it. I went forward step by step, playing a part in other spheres as well, in the Labour Party, playing a part in the Fabian Society. I set up the Fabian Women's Network. That's now 10 years on, runs a political education programme, mentors young women coming through, or not just young, but women of any age coming through into politics. I think there are women aged 19 to 50 on our mentoring scheme, because you can enter politics at any stage in your life. And when you come in when you're older, you're coming in with your life experience that's very enriching. What you're learning is about the language and the process of politics. And those are very common. So I think I'm very fortunate that my parents were open-minded enough to allow us to go forward. We've always maintained a very close relationship in our family, and I feel very fortunate that my parents were part of the by-election, that they were here, that they were at the election count, that they were able to see that dream of mine become a reality. And
very
even
proud moment for any parent, isn't it?
I think it was unexpected, and my in-laws as well have always been very supportive and have participated with me in the community a lot as well. My husband, whenever he's here, when he's not travelling, is usually with me in the constituency as well. And for me, making sure that my family and my in-laws were going to be behind me was important in taking that step, because the truth is that politics is not easy. The compromises your family makes as well are enormous, and sometimes we don't realise that at the start. The reality of elected life as well is very different to what you expect. But it's a service, and with that service you take what comes with it. You then have to set some of those boundaries and try and protect some family time. But also so long as I think you involve the family and you stay true to why you're there, then I think you make it work.
But sharing this experience of yours, the key thing what you look at is that you need that support for you to be successful in the role you've adapted to be as a politician, because it's very time consuming, different hours as we can see, and it's the background, because you have to balance as a mother, as a daughter-in-law, as a daughter, everything, plus your main role into mainstream politics and in the public eye. It's a very hard game. It's not easy, but the thing which you don't see, we don't sometimes appreciate how much sacrifices the elected members of parliament have to do. We always condemn them because, they haven't done anything. It's the normal nature of a human being as a normal voter. But it's a lot of sacrifice. Am I wrong or am I right on that?
It is a lot of sacrifice, and I can just relate. So many people that I haven't actually seen for 3 years, so many friends who I was close to who are very understanding as well, and you keep in touch in different ways, but your life really then becomes just more your immediate life and your constituency and Westminster, and when you have a responsibility as in a portfolio, then going around the country to understand the issues, the policy issues that you'll have responsibility for speaking on in Parliament also becomes an extra level of work. I think one area that has been very helpful, if many will have watched the Inside the Commons programme that's been on, and to have had those cameras in the Commons over the last year. Actually, sometimes we used to laugh with them. We never knew what they were going to choose to put in the documentary, but it has been helpful in people understanding the complexity of the life of politics. There are so many different parts to it, and you work often 70 or 80 hours a week. Then you have your team that you have to look after as well. They work incredibly hard as well on the casework and on other issues, and it is a 24-hour job.
It is.
You're always, there if anything happens. You always, sometimes I can have the police call me at the weekend as well if there's been something happen in the constituency. So on that, it's just something you understand as being part of what you have to do.
Sure. Got elected first time, walking into Westminster. If you can share that experience as well with the viewers, because we all see the Big Ben, we all go and have our photographs outside the Parliament. That's every tourist, every countryman wants to see that. Becoming a member of Parliament, walking in, what was the feeling then? Was it scary, or were you really on a high that I'm elected today? It's my first vote. Share that.
Well, I have to say it was just the most incredible feeling, and still it's there. It never goes away when you go into Westminster. And whilst I had been there as a researcher for Harriet for 5 months while she was while she was acting leader, and also she's deputy leader, what I really realised is that even though you can be in the same building, you can be in a building as a researcher, you can be in the building as somebody who's working in the House of Commons, you can be in the building as a doorkeeper, as Hansard, as the clerks, many of those roles that exist. Actually, you don't really understand the life of the Member of Parliament till you're walking down the same corridors and walking in the footsteps of those who have come before you, who have been your role models. So there is something that is very, very humbling about that, because when I was talking about how we need to nurture and also protect our democracy, I also believe the House of Commons is an incredibly special place.
It is.
And even now, even if I'm working till 10, 11, 12 at night, which is not unusual for members of Parliament, when you're coming out and Big Ben strikes midnight, you think there's something just incredibly special. So it did feel very unreal. It did feel that somehow I had to pinch myself. Was it really me? And then when you go into the House of Commons or into the House of Lords, and the people who you grew up watching on TV are in the same chamber as you, or they're in the same place having lunch as you, you think, is this really real? And I think it's important to always remember that, because if you don't, then you can sometimes become too used to it. But what you really have to do is maintain that link with the constituency, to maintain that bridge between Westminster and the constituency, to remember what your priorities are, and to remember who you're there to serve.
That's the key, that's the most important bit, isn't it, in a politician's career. Every political party, whether it's Labour, Conservative, the other parties, Liberal Dems and UKIP, focus women, we want more women members of Parliament. What's your views on that? You're one of the elected members of Parliament. I don't think so many women parliamentarians are there at the moment. What's your thoughts with that?
My thoughts are that Britain has a long way to go.
Sure.
And that we have to change this. We have to change it as quickly as possible. I think we will do even better at the next election. One thing is a guarantee: unless women come forward,
sure,
more women will not be elected. And we currently have about 23% of Parliament as women. We are around 70th in the world in terms of parliaments, in terms of that ratio. And that is not where we should be. 70th across the world of about 190 nations. So our representation is not a positive story, our gender representation.
Sure.
And I was actually the 366th woman to ever be elected to the House of Commons.
Okay.
There are only 370 in the whole history of the House of Commons. There's only been 370 women ever elected, and at any one time there's 650, approximately 650 members of Parliament.
Sure.
Even now, I believe there's about less than 500 out of the 650 seats where there's at least one woman candidate. There will be many seats where there are only male candidates standing for any party. And the reason is, unless we have women coming into politics, it doesn't change the dynamic. It doesn't bring those different experiences in, often the challenges of balancing work and home life, often those challenges of equal pay. Not just that, but women are obviously able to work and lead on issues around the economy, but often do it with a different eye as well, because you'll have a different experience in the family, a different experience in society, a different experience of discrimination, a different experience of what goes well. But it's still less than 100 years since men and women got the vote equally. And when you think about that, there's still women who will remember when they didn't actually have the vote. That's an incredible story. So we've come a long way, but we still have a very, very long way to go.
Obviously, when we look at that, what are the mainstream parties doing about it? Are they actively encouraging or bringing in more women candidates, that take the seats, or are they not involved in that at the moment?
Well, the Labour Party has had a very strong history on this, because if you take somebody like Harriet Harman, when she came into Parliament, less than 10% of Parliament was women, not even that. And she actually has been one of the trailblazers to say we've got to transform our politics, and that is the responsibility of every party, because when you go into Parliament, you're going in as your party as well. And so the Labour Party has in its party policy that we believe we need 50% of our parliamentarians to be women. Currently we have about 33%. So we are ahead of the other parties, almost double the Conservatives. They have about 17% of their parliamentary party being women. And the Liberal Democrats have even fewer. So each party has to take a stand. The Labour Party recognised early that because of the social structures we still have in all communities, the Asian community is a social structure that's also dominated by men, as we'll all have seen. But it's the same in all communities. And so to actually have women selected to be the candidates sometimes requires change as well. We brought in all women shortlists. And those shortlists made a very big difference to the number of women who got selected to run, then who got elected as well. So in 1997, there were over 100 women who were elected to the House of Commons for the first time. And so the battles then remain, both within the party and outside, about whether you have those positive action measures or you have the hope that the world will change and more women will come forward and they will be selected. But what we do know is that people don't always select fairly. And so there'll be women who are still asked, how will you manage with your husband and being a member of Parliament? Just this week, my friend Rachel Reeves was challenged about how will you have your baby and still be a senior shadow minister or minister if Labour win in government. And she and others have also shown, that you can balance when you have the support that you put in place, and that women have to be in the position of choosing. You cannot have a situation where you have really views of that are others who are really not relating to your experience, your support, your capabilities, who are trying to dictate that for you. So that's been also a great concern that we maintain, because you always have to do this in politics. You have to maintain those, in a sense, the enablers for people to come forward for when you do take time out for family, whether it is as a man or a woman, that you are protected in that. That's why we protected the maternity leave and also paternity leave. And much of that would actually be removed by UKIP as well. So these things aren't protected forever. It can depend on how politics plays out and who has more influence. But in that, what we're saying is we believe fundamentally also that those who are parents actually bring a very important experience into the reality of politics and political debate. So it has to be supported and protected. So the Labour Party has had a strong history. It believes very strongly in supporting those positive action measures proportionately to where it's needed. So many seats are open selection as well. I was selected on an open selection, so in my selection there were men as well as women running. But in areas and regions where women are much more underrepresented, the Labour Party may bring in more all-women shortlists. My colleague Lucy Powell was the first woman to ever be elected into any Manchester seat when she was elected 2 years ago. And when we hear I was the first woman to ever be a representative for Feltham and Heston. And when you hear that, you see that we're still only changing at a snail's pace.
Nowadays, we still don't realise women have achieved a lot than what people think. Majority of people, sometimes they know this. It's a man's dominated world. The politics is man's game. It's not. You look at very powerful politicians all around the world. You have very, very shrewd and very sharp women politicians who have done a lot of work around the world in very high positions. You look at Hillary Clinton, how much work she's done. You know, if you look at the US and other parts, you know, I mean, and the contribution is huge. And as people want to see, when you look at the politicians, you look at what she's done or an MP has done in her local constituency where he's representing, or if he's a minister in the government, whatever in the 5 years term that government has achieved. And obviously every party wants to beat his own drum, that this is what we've done. But the contribution, what we look back, when we look into the history of every individual who has been elected and who has contributed, can be seen when you talk to your local constituency, which you are here. Look at the achievements which people talk to you, not yourself. And you're a very strong contender in your part for the next elections because of what work you've put in. Or am I wrong with that?
Well, I hope so. We do put in a lot of work.
Yeah. Now, you look at, that's balancing a lot of things to bring that best thing for your local patch, and then working with the government, although you guys are not in power at the moment, but still getting things achieved on your patch. What do you think is your biggest achievement as your tenure coming to the end of the elections? What do you think have you achieved which gives you big satisfaction for your local area, your local communities, because your passion for communities, as you talked when you started, what do you think have you been able to give back as an elected parliamentarian?
Well, I would start with something that has started to become a reality now. I believe very strongly when I came in that Feltham, which is a big part of the Feltham and Heston constituency, didn't have as much attention being given to it, and that it was in desperate need of regeneration and support. The Feltham arenas, where I used to go and kind of do sports and participate in athletics when I was young, which Mo Farah also trained at, was derelict. And my belief was you needed to regenerate the area for people to have civic pride, to have a sense of confidence about what they can do, to have a sense of ambition. They need to see also that the area they live in is itself something they can be proud of.
Sure.
And so we started a campaign early to bring back the Feltham arenas. I also then campaigned for Feltham to have its own regeneration plan, following Brentford, following Hounslow. And I'm really proud that Hounslow Council took that on, made that commitment, which is now starting to become realised when there's a consultation that's now beginning with local residents to talk about the area. It's got to be a place that's family friendly. It's got to be a place where people can go in the evening, families together, where young people feel safe, where we're integrating the best of our assets, bringing out our history and our heritage. Feltham has a tremendous history and heritage, which really is lost when you're looking at the kind of built environment it currently has. When you go around and people don't know their neighbours, and yet you know so many people individually who should be better networked with each other. So focusing on how you regenerate an area, my next eye is on Cranford, where I believe it hasn't had the attention it needs, that it's been hidden by the airport being nearby, and yet people there are desperate to have that sense of pride come back for an area they've lived in for generations themselves. So sometimes you have to have the confidence to be able to speak on those bigger issues and to be able to build your coalitions of support to make those changes happen. So I'm constantly thinking about how do I bridge the voices I'm hearing from the people with the powers the council has, the decision making that the council has, but also how we can bring in national resources to help on that. In addition, I believe very much in our civic leadership. What you find in areas where there is greater poverty is that civic leadership is less. People have fewer resources. They have less experience of leadership. Their parents weren't on boards of companies, or they weren't necessarily on the boards of the schools. They weren't involved in charities. And it's those skills that you can build that are intergenerational as well, that mean that young people have an environment in which they're growing up, feeling confident about being leaders themselves too. So focusing on civic leadership through some of the programs I've brought into the constituency, the youth conference I have coming up, the charities I'm supporting being established so that we can bring in more money into the area, to actually bring people together to be involved in more local decision making, to bring that empowerment is actually what starts to turn around confidence in local areas. When you do that, what I find, and I build the connections between the police as well and the local communities, is that they put the challenge directly to the public services to say, why aren't you delivering better for us? If you deliver better for us, we can deliver better for our communities. We have to think much bigger about what we're trying to achieve, which is communities moving on. Families having those opportunities, individuals in those families having the chance to get better jobs, more income, young people in those families seeing their parents going to work, then seeing attainment as they get supported and going to school, getting greater. I believe very much in the connection between schools and our communities also. So part of what I've done through the business networks we've set up as well, and my work with the schools, is to say we need to build those connections more strongly between our local businesses and our trades and the school life. When you do that, you have work experience opportunities for young people that grow, something I've campaigned on since the government actually stopped work experience for under 16-year-olds being compulsory. Labour's committed to bringing that back, partly because of the campaign that I ran on this, because when I look back to my own experience, when I grew up in a shop, I grew up in an environment where you're experiencing work.
Day in, day out.
and so many children, in families of like Indian families where you have home businesses, you're experiencing work.
As a second nature, you've got to do it.
Second nature. It's like an apprenticeship, just as people have learned from their mothers and fathers in so many other ways. And where children don't have that, or they may struggle, as I see people struggle where somebody is sick or ill, one of the parents or the children may have that, or the parent goes to work but the children never sees that, the children see that place of work. You don't have that understanding being passed on, which is why work experience is so important. Also to give children exposure to different areas of work. It could be the health service, could be industry, could be local shops, could be anything. So in that I've been really supportive of our schools when they've been looking at different ways of working with businesses, making some of those introductions, opening those doors, but also bringing down the barriers that exist between education, the community, businesses. When you take down those barriers, you start to see a new energy coming into the local area. So that has continued to be a focus for me, and it will be continuing going forward.
Sure. Seema ji, listening to your views and your experiences, a lot of people are watching this program all over the UK, all over Europe. What would your message be to our young viewers or even the elders? Mainstream politics. We don't have enough of our politicians, our community representation in Parliament, my opinion of things. If you can just share some of your thoughts on that, please.
I think it's essential that we have more from our communities coming forward, not least because we need certainly a greater representation of Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims. We've had some progress at the last election. Before the last election, there had never been an Asian woman elected to Parliament, and I'm the first female Punjabi to ever be elected into the House of Commons. Yeah, in the history of the House of Commons. So, so in that, you don't always realise how special that is and how important it is. When I went to India last year as well, and I visited Punjab on an official trip, and also Delhi as well. When I visited Punjab and went back to where my parents had been, certainly my mother's family still are in Jalandhar, and visited Bingulwara as well. I'd hosted BBG when she came to the UK and had a visit in Parliament where I was able to have her share her thoughts on the environment and other issues with other politicians. That's part of building bridges. And the bridges that we build, those connections that we make, actually make not just India stronger, not just Britain stronger, they make our relationships stronger, but they also share those important learnings and challenge each other. If there's one thing that we need to be confident in and always believe, it is that by having a more integrated world, that we make our world safer and that we make our progress stronger. And where we see division coming into our politics, whether it is through the language of Britain leaving Europe, or it's through some of the rise in racism that we've seen, the attacks also on the Jewish community, some of the Islamic phobia that we've seen, these things create insecurity. But actually you have to have a politics that believes in integration, that supports that as part of its really valuing of diversity. And in that, as coming in as a British Asian politician, we have in a sense an additional responsibility. I have a responsibility as a Labour politician, and I see that very strongly in my community. People who have struggled to make ends meet. You know, the average family in Britain is now £1,600 worse off than 4 years ago. The way we saw the prices rise in terms of energy, which is why we called for the freezing of energy prices, the way we've actually seen the cost of living rise, the way from my constituency, if you're working on the minimum wage on a job in London, you'll spend 3 months of your year's salary just getting to and from work on public transport. You know, we believe you've got to make the means to get to work and to have a job much less costly. That's why we're also now saying we've got to invest much more in childcare, 25 hours free childcare for 3 and 4 year olds, because those are the enablers to help people get on, whatever their backgrounds. So in a sense, you have to play that very important part as a Labour politician. And in my role as well as the Shadow Minister for Preventing Violence Against Women and Girls, I go around as the Labour representative. But what I do find is where there are issues that we have within our own communities, sometimes more strongly, whether that's forced marriage or it's or it can be sometimes child marriage, though that's obviously much less here. Issues of domestic violence that we see, sexual violence that we've seen across the country as well. We can also understand some of those cultural issues that may have contributed in some areas to not necessarily always to them happening, but to us not always challenging some of that, which really we've become much more confident at doing. But I also believe when we challenge those issues here, we are much stronger in helping India sometimes challenge some of those terrible crimes that happen, whether it's the rapes or that we see so common, or other issues. And so for coming forward in politics, it's vital that we have all our communities represented. We should see a parliament in Britain that's much more representative of the population in Britain. That's how you know you'll be picking up the issues. That's how you know you'll also be connecting with the communities. That's how people will feel they have a role model and voices that represent them in Parliament.
Seema ji, I think we could carry on, but looking at the time scale, I think we have to take leave from our viewers. I thank you very much from the bottom of our heart for giving us the opportunity and time to share some of the moments in your career. We wish you all the best, and may Waheguru progress you more and you achieve what you want to achieve and do all the services for the community. Your last message to our viewers?
My last message would just be that if I believe anything, it is that everybody should participate in an election. This is not an election as well you can sit on the sidelines. This is actually, in one way, one of the most important elections. It's a real choice. And it's a choice where we could come out of this with 6 parties in Westminster, much more complex politics in terms of how we build maybe coalitions or how we make the case. And what we need to know is that everybody has played their part. In the last election as well, 9 million women didn't vote. And so one of the things I've done is I've been hosting on behalf of Harriet what we've called the Pink Bus that's gone around the country. Last week I took it to Reading and to Southampton, and it also came to my constituency, Feltham and Heston. And the reason being because it's a symbol of participation. It's an enabler to start a conversation. So I would encourage people to start their conversations in the home, start the conversation in the community. What needs to change? What case do you put to politicians during election time? Communities can also hold their own hustings. As residents, you can also bring together a hustings and invite your candidates to come. That's how you bring politics into the community, because politics is a partnership. It's a partnership between Westminster and people, and it's a partnership between politicians and people. And I would strongly encourage everyone to play their part, to not sit on the sidelines, and to make sure that in this election, this important choice, for us with the Labour Party, we believe it's a choice between us and the Conservatives, where from our point of view, it's a choice between who wins and who loses. And we believe that everybody should be contributing as in accordance to their means in society. We shouldn't have a situation where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer in society, where the gap is growing in the way that it is. So those are the choices we make, and bringing a more equal kind of sense of who gains from some of the changes in the economy and the growth in the economy as well, that should reach ordinary families as well. That's what we believe, and I hope people will be asking those questions as we come closer to the election.
Thank you very much. Let's take again. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.